Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story. There is a particular sound a clock makes in the final second before it stops forever. Most people never hear it. I heard it on the evening my only son slid a piece of paper across my workbench and told me with a small and patient smile that I was no longer of sound mind. The paper was a medical report. It carried the letterhead of a physician I had never met, a Dr. Julian Foss, and it declared in cold clinical language that Edmund Hale, 69 years of age, was suffering from advanced dementia and could no longer be trusted to manage his own affairs. Beneath it was a second document, thicker, colder still, a petition for conservatorship. If a judge signed it, my son would own my name. He would own my shop, my accounts, my signature, my breath. My daughter-in-law Sabrina stood behind him with her arms folded, watching me the way a person watches a broken machine they have already decided to throw away. And my son Marcus would not look at me. He looked at the clocks on the wall instead, all 40 of them ticking in their patient chorus, as though the brass and glass might excuse what his mouth could not. I want you to remember that smile of his, because you will understand it better by the end of this story than you do now. And I want you to remember the name Julian Foss, the doctor I had never met, the man who signed away my mind for money. Because 3 weeks after this night, that same doctor would appear at my door in the rain, pale and shaking, and whisper 4 words that would turn everything the other way around. He had been keeping a second set of records, and this time, the broken man doing the counting would not be me. But I am getting ahead of myself. A watchmaker learns never to skip a gear. So let me take the whole thing apart for you piece by piece and lay it out on the cloth, the way I would the movement of an old pocket watch, so you can see exactly how it was built and exactly how it failed. My name is Edmund Hale, and for the better part of 50 years, I have repaired the finest clockwork ever made. I do this in a narrow shop on a quiet lane in Savannah, Georgia, a shop I have kept since I was a younger man than my son is now. Before the clocks, I was an engineer. Precision measurement was my trade, the science of things that must be exact or must not exist at all. A bridge that is off by a fraction will still fall. A gear cut 1 degree wrong will still jam the whole machine. I spent my life learning to see the small error that ruins the large design. It is a habit that does not switch off when a man retires. As it turned out, it would be the only thing that saved my life. People who came into my shop saw an old man in a worn cardigan bent over a bench with a loop screwed into his eye, and they made the easy assumptions people make. They saw a modest trade, a modest till, a modest life. They saw a widower who drove a 15-year-old sedan and ate his supper alone. What they did not see, what almost no one on this earth knew, was the truth I had kept quiet for a very long time. My late wife Eleanor and I had spent decades acquiring something. Not money at first, time. Antique timepieces, the rarest in the world movements built by masters 2 centuries dead, along with a portfolio of mechanical patents I had drawn up in my engineering years and never stopped earning from. All of it was held quietly through an international auction house and a private trust managed by a woman named Vivian Reyes, whom I trusted more than I trusted my own blood. The collection was worth a great deal, far more than my son could have guessed, and his failure to guess it would cost him everything. But I have promised not to skip gears, so leave that where it sits for now. I never told Marcus about any of it. I told myself I was teaching him the value of his own 2 hands, the way my father taught me. Perhaps that was true. Perhaps I was only afraid of what money does to people who have not earned it. Either way, I let my son believe I was an ordinary old man with an ordinary little shop, and I have wondered many times since whether that silence was the wisest thing I ever did, or the cruelest thing I ever did to him. There was one person who knew me better than most. Her name was Cora Bennett, a young woman who had come to me 3 years earlier asking to learn the trade and who now worked at the bench beside mine. She had steadier hands at 26 than most men have at 40, Remember her too. She matters more than she seems, to the way a small escapement wheel matters more than the great heavy pendulum everyone admires. So that was my life on the morning of the day it all began. Quiet, exact, wound and running true. I had no idea that the mechanism had already been tampered with, that hands I loved had been reaching inside the case for weeks, loosening the parts one by one. It was near closing when the little bell above my door rang, and I looked up from the movement I was cleaning to see my son step inside and behind him his wife. Marcus was smiling. He told me he had something important to discuss. And something in the way he said it, some tiny error in the pitch of his voice, made the loop feel suddenly heavy in my eye. Marcus set his briefcase on my workbench, right on top of the movement I had been cleaning, and I remember thinking that a man does not put a briefcase on another man's work unless he has already decided that work no longer matters. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about your situation." I asked him what situation he meant. I was 69, not 90. I had balanced the shop's books that morning and repaired a repeating movement from 1890 that afternoon. Work that requires a steadier hand and a clearer head than most men half my age possess. But Marcus did not answer me directly. He opened the briefcase and took out a folder, and Sabrina took a step forward, because this was the part she had been waiting for. "We've been worried about you for a long time," she said. Her voice was soft and rehearsed the voice of a woman who has practiced her lines in a mirror. The forgetfulness, the confusion. "Marcus and I think it's time someone helped you manage things before you hurt yourself, or before you make a mistake you can't undo." I told her I had not been forgetful or confused. I told her I could not recall a single instance she could point to. And Sabrina smiled the same way people smile at a child who insists he is not tired. And she slid the folder across the bench toward me. "That's exactly what the doctor said you'd say," she told me. "Denial, it's part of the condition." I opened the folder. The first page was a medical report, several pages of it, dense with clinical language, and my own name printed at the top like the name of a stranger. Edmund Hale, advanced dementia, progressive cognitive decline, unable to manage financial or personal affairs. It described episodes I had never had. It described a man wandering, forgetting his own address, leaving the stove burning, failing to recognize his family. It described appointments I had supposedly attended, tests I had supposedly failed, conversations I had supposedly forgotten. I had attended none of them. I had failed none of them. I had never sat in any examination room and answered any of those questions, because the man described on that page was not me and never had been. "When was I examined?" I asked. Marcus finally spoke. "Over the last few months, Dad. You just don't remember. That's the whole point." It was a clever answer, and I want you to notice how clever it was, because it is the trap that catches every old person who is robbed this way. Once a piece of paper says your memory is gone, then every true thing you say becomes proof of your illness. I say I was never there, and they say, "Of course you don't remember being there." My denial was folded into their story as evidence for it. The more truthfully I protested, the sicker I appeared. It is a machine that runs on your own honesty, and it is nearly impossible to break from the inside. I turned to the second document, the thicker one, a petition for conservatorship to be filed with the county court. It asked the court to appoint my son as the conservator of my person and my estate. In plain words, it asked a judge to take my legal existence and hand it to Marcus. My right to sign a contract, my right to sell or keep my property, my right to decide where I lived, what I ate, whom I saw. All of it transferred on the strength of that medical report. "We're not trying to hurt you," Marcus said. "We're trying to protect you. Once the court approves this, you won't have to worry about the shop, the bills, any of it. We'll handle everything. You can just rest." Rest. I had heard that word used as a weapon before, and I knew what it meant when it came dressed in a smile. It meant disappear. It meant sit down somewhere quiet and stop being a person with a signature. But I did not argue with him. I want you to understand that this was the first small decision that saved me, though I did not fully know it yet. Some old instinct, the same instinct that had spent 50 years refusing to force a jammed gear, told me not to push against the mechanism until I understood how it was built. So I let my hands tremble a little. I let my voice waver. I asked him, in the confused tone they wanted to hear, who this doctor was. This Dr. Foss, whose name I saw stamped at the bottom of the report. And it was then, looking down at that signature, that the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Because I read the name slowly. Julian Foss, M.D. I read it a second time. I searched my memory, and my memory, whatever they claimed about it, was a precise and well-kept instrument. I had lived in Savannah for decades. I knew my physician, an old friend named Harold Pierce, who had treated me for 20 years and would have laughed aloud at the word dementia. I had never in my life been referred to a specialist. I had never sat across a desk from anyone named Foss. I had never shaken his hand, never given him my history, never let him shine a light in my eyes, or ask me the day of the week. I had never met this doctor, not once, not anywhere, and yet here was his signature, confident and certified, swearing under his professional oath that he had examined me thoroughly and found my mind in ruins. I looked up at my son's patient smile and at Sabrina's folded arms, and I understood in that cold and clarifying instant that a physician I had never laid eyes on had signed a document declaring me insane, which meant one of two things. Either the doctor was lying, or the doctor did not exist at all. I did not yet know which answer was the true one, but I knew the way I know when a movement has one gear too few, that somewhere in this clean and terrible machine there was a loose part, a single flaw that its makers had not accounted for. And I have spent my whole life finding exactly that. They left the folder with me. That was their second mistake, though I did not count it as such at the time. People who are certain they have already won grow careless with evidence, and Marcus was certain. He told me to read it over, to let it sink in that the hearing was only a formality, and there was nothing to be gained by fighting it. Then he took his briefcase off my bench, and he and Sabrina walked out into the evening, and the little bell rang behind them the way it always did, as though nothing in the world had changed. I locked the door, I turned the sign, and then I did what I have done every night of my working life. I cleared my bench, laid out a clean cloth, and took the thing in front of me apart to see how it worked. Only this time, the thing was not a clock. It was the folder. A watchmaker does not look at a movement the way an ordinary person does. An ordinary person sees a face and two hands and is satisfied. I see the train of gears behind the face, each one turning the next, and I know that if the hands are moving wrongly, the fault is never in the hands. The fault is somewhere back in the train, in a single tooth, a single pivot, and my job is to follow the motion backward until I find it. So I did not read that medical report as a son reads an accusation. I read it as an engineer reads a failure. And a failure laid out on the cloth tells you things. The first thing it told me was that this had taken time. The report described months of decline appointments and tests spread across a calendar. You do not invent months of false history in an afternoon of anger. This had been assembled slowly, patiently, while I sat 40 feet away, cleaning movements and suspecting nothing. Someone had been building this in secret for a long while, adding a piece at a time, the way I build a repair, and that patience frightened me more than any shouting could have. The second thing it told me was that whoever built it knew things only family could know. The report referenced my address, my late wife's name, the layout of my own house, the medications old Harold Pierce had once prescribed me for my blood pressure. A stranger could not have known these. A doctor I had never met could not have known these. Someone had fed him this information, someone with a key to my life. And there was only one person alive who held that key. My son had been in my house 100 times. My son knew which drawer held my papers. My son knew the name of every pill in my cabinet. I did not want it to be Marcus. I want to be honest with you about that, because if I pretend I felt nothing that night, I am lying to you, and I promised at the start to lay this out true. There was a moment sitting alone at that bench when I let myself imagine that he had been fooled too, that Sabrina had done this to both of us. But I have spent 50 years refusing to believe the comfortable explanation over the correct one, and the correct one was plain. No one but Marcus could have supplied what that report contained. He had not been deceived. He had been the source. The third thing the folder told me was the most important, and it was the thing I had glimpsed already in that signature. The whole machine turned on one gear, and that gear was Dr. Julian Foss. Everything else, the petition, the hearing, my son's patient smile, all of it depended entirely on that medical report being accepted as real. Pull that one document out of the train, prove it false. Prove that no lawful examination ever took place, and the entire mechanism would cease. A court cannot strip a man of his life on the word of a doctor who never met him. Foss was the pivot the whole thing spun on. Foss was the loose part, which meant Foss was where I would begin. But I understood something else too, sitting there in the locked shop with the report in pieces before me. I understood that I must not let them see me understand any of it. If I marched into that courtroom shouting that I was sane, that I had never met the doctor, that my son was a thief, I would sound exactly like the man the report described. A confused old man, agitated, paranoid, insisting the world had turned against him. They had built a story in which my sanity was the proof of my madness, and the only way to beat a machine like that is not to push against it. It is to let it keep running while you reach inside and change the parts it does not know you can touch. So I made a decision that night that went against everything in my nature. I decided to lie. I, who had spent my whole life insisting that a thing be exactly what it claimed to be, decided to become something I was not. For as long as it took, I would be the frail and failing old man they had described on paper. I would tremble when they wanted trembling. I would forget when they wanted forgetting. I would let my son believe he had already won, because a man who believes he has won stops guarding his flank. And while I wore that mask, I would take their beautiful machine apart, the way I had just taken apart their folder. Tooth by tooth, pivot by pivot, beginning with the one gear they had been too arrogant to make sure of. I gathered the pages back into the folder, and I turned off the bench lamp, and in the dark of the shop, the 40 clocks went on ticking, patient and exact, counting down a time that only I now knew was running. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark of the house Eleanor and I had shared for 30 years, and I let my mind run backward through the past several months, the way you rewind a striking clock to find where the chime went wrong. Because a report like the one in that folder does not come from nowhere. Months of decline, it had said. Episodes, incidents. And I knew lying there that if the paper described incidents, then somewhere in my recent life, there must have been moments that were staged to become those incidents. Nothing in that folder was true. But that did not mean nothing had happened. It meant something had been made to happen. And when I looked for it, I found it. It had been 3 weeks earlier, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Marcus had come by the shop, which in itself should have warned me, because my son did not come by the shop. He had not shown real interest in my work since he was a boy, and in recent years his visits had shrunk to holidays and the occasional obligatory Sunday. But that Thursday he arrived unannounced, cheerful, carrying 2 coffees, and he stayed for over an hour. At the time, I had been touched by it. I see now that I was being set up like a photograph. There was a customer in the shop that day, a woman named Mrs. Delacroix, come to collect a mantel clock I had restored for her. And there was Cora at her bench, and there was a delivery man who came and went. 4 witnesses if you counted Marcus. I did not think about that at the time. I think about it a great deal now. What happened was this. I had finished Mrs. Delacroix's clock and wrapped it and set it on the counter with her ticket, a small paper tag bearing her name and the price. Marcus asked me a question just then, some question about an old wall clock of his grandmother's. And while I was turned toward him answering it, the ticket somehow was no longer on the counter. When Mrs. Delacroix asked for her total, I reached for the tag and it was gone, and I stood there patting the counter confused, while my son watched me with a strange, soft attention I mistook for concern. "It's all right, Dad," he had said gently, loudly enough for the whole shop to hear. "Take your time. You wrote it down somewhere. Do you remember where you put it?" And I had not remembered because there was nothing to remember. I searched my apron, the drawer, the floor. Mrs. Delacroix grew uncomfortable. Cora came over to help. And Marcus kept up that quiet, patient narration, the kind you use for someone who is slipping, until I felt, for one humiliating moment, that perhaps I truly was losing hold of things. In the end, I simply named her a price from memory, and she paid it and left. And Marcus put his hand on my shoulder and said we should talk soon about getting me some help. I'd found that ticket 2 days later. It was tucked inside the case of a clock on the far shelf, a clock I had not touched in a week, a clock at the opposite end of the shop from where I had been standing. A ticket does not walk 20 feet and climb into a sealed case by itself. Someone had taken it off the counter while I was turned away and hidden it where I would find it too late to matter if I found it at all. And there had been only one person near enough and turned toward me deliberately with a question to do it. At the time when I found the tack, I had laughed at myself and thought I was getting forgetful in my old age. That is the poison of the thing. He had not only staged the incident, he had made me doubt my own mind so that I would carry the doubt for him, so that I would half believe his story before he ever told it. This is how it is done to old people. Not with one great lie, but with 100 small engineered moments, each one designed to make you the unreliable narrator of your own life. Lying in the dark, I saw the Thursday for what it was. Not an accident, not a symptom. A performance with me as the unwitting player, and 4 witnesses to swear later that yes, they had seen poor Mr. Hale confused and unable to complete a simple sale. I wondered how many other such Thursdays there had been that I had not yet remembered. The forgotten name at the family dinner that Sabrina had corrected too quickly. The appointment I was scolded for missing that I was sure had never been made. The car keys found in the freezer that I would have sworn I never put there. Each one at the time a small, private worry. Each one I now understood, a scene filmed and filed to be assembled into the report that would erase me. The cruelty of it was not the theft. I have known thieves. The cruelty was that he had reached into the one place a man cannot defend his own trust in his own memory, and he had loosened it on purpose, so that even I would help build the case against myself. I sat up in the dark. My heart was steady, though I will not pretend it was cold. Not yet. That night it still ached in the ordinary way a father's heart aches. But beneath the ache, the old engineer had already begun to work, and the engineer was not confused at all. The engineer had just found the second gear in the train and had understood something vital about the men who built the machine. They had rehearsed this, and a thing that is rehearsed can be predicted. A thing that is predicted can be trapped. I did not yet know how deep the debt ran that had driven my son to this, or who was truly waiting at the end of it. But I knew now that it had begun long before that folder touched my bench, and I knew where to look next. Not at the past they had staged for me, but at the money. Because a man does not build a machine this elaborate to steal a watchmaker's modest shop. He builds it because he is desperate, and desperate men leave tracks. Morning came, and I did what a desperate man's father does when he has finally stopped being blind. I went looking for the money. I want to explain something first because it matters for everything that follows. For the last several years, I had kept my life divided into 2 halves, and I had kept them apart on purpose. On one side was the man everyone could see. That man had a single ordinary account at a local bank, into which flowed the modest earnings of the shop and a small pension from my engineering years, and out of which paid the water bill and the property tax and the groceries for one. It held on a good month. Perhaps $40,000. It was the account Marcus knew about. It was the only account Marcus knew about. Whenever he glanced at a statement left on my kitchen counter, that was the number he saw, and I had let him go on seeing it his whole adult life because I wanted my son to build something with his own hands rather than wait for mine to empty into his. On the other side was everything else. But leave that where it sits, as I promised. For now understand only that the account Marcus watched was the small one, and that the small one was the first place a thief would reach. So I sat down at the old desk in the back room, the one Eleanor used to call my burrow, and I logged into that local account, and I looked. It was empty. Not low, not overdrawn, empty, in the deliberate way that only a person leaves an account swept down to a balance of a few dollars with the last real money gone in a single motion. I sat very still and looked at that number for a long moment, the way you look at a clock that is stopped though you are certain you wound it. Then I opened the history and I read the story the numbers told. 3 days earlier, while I had been standing at my bench, suspecting nothing, a wire transfer had gone out of my account. Nearly $38,000, almost the whole of it, moved in one clean stroke to an account I did not recognize. And beside the transfer, in the little memo line, where a person types a note to remind themselves what a payment was for, someone had written 2 words: care deposit. Care. There it was again, that word they kept dressing their theft in, the way you drape a cloth over a thing you do not want looked at too closely. A deposit for my care, it meant to say. A payment toward the facility where they intended to store me once the court handed them my name. They had taken the last of the money I could see, and they had labeled it an act of love. Now, here is the thing that stopped me, and I need you to follow it carefully, because this was the moment the whole story turned, though I did not yet understand how far it would turn. When I saw that empty account, I felt many things, but panic was not among them, and I will tell you honestly why. It was not courage. It was that the money in that account had never truly mattered to me. I could lose that $40,000 and lose it again 100 times over and never feel the floor move. The reason for that is the other half of my life, the half I keep promising to explain. And I promise again that I will. But the point that mattered that morning was this: I was not afraid of losing the money. So I was free to ask a colder and more useful question than a frightened man could ask. Not why are they stealing from me, but why are they stealing so little? Because it made no sense. Sit with it as I sat with it. My son and his wife lived by every appearance extremely well. A fine house in a fine part of the city, 2 imported cars in the drive. Sabrina forever in new clothes, forever flying somewhere, forever describing herself as a consultant to people who never seemed to ask what she consulted upon. They wore success the way some people wear cologne, thickly so you would smell it before you saw them. People like that do not build an elaborate, months-long, federally criminal scheme to forge a medical report and steal a conservatorship and sweep out an old man's checking account for $38,000. That is not the crime of the comfortable. That is the crime of the drowning. $38,000 was not a windfall to people who lived as they lived. It was a gasp of air. It was the amount you take when you are frantic, when a payment is due, that you cannot make when the smooth surface of your life is about to crack, and you will do anything at all, to hold it together 1 more week. Rich people do not risk prison for a gasp of air. Only sinking ones do. And that told me something the staged Thursdays and the forged doctor had not. It told me that behind my son's patient smile was not greed but fear. He was not carving me up because he wanted more. He was carving me up because he owed. Somewhere out there was a debt large enough and frightening enough to make a man sacrifice his own father to it. And a debt like that has an owner, a face, a deadline. I needed to know whose face. I needed to know how much and to whom, and how soon, because the shape of their desperation would be the shape of the trap I built for them. And there was exactly one person on this earth who could pull that truth out of the dark for me quietly, thoroughly, and without a whisper reaching my son. I reached into the desk drawer, past the ordinary things, to the small locked case at the back. Inside it was a phone I used for one purpose only. I sat with it in my hand for a moment, listening to the clocks in the front room mark the hour. Then I dialed the only number it had ever called, and I waited for Vivian Reyes to answer. She answered on the second ring, though it was not yet 7 in the morning, because Vivian Reyes had never, in 15 years, let a call from me ring a third time. "Mr. Hale," she said. Her voice was already awake, already precise. "It's early. Tell me what's wrong." I had known Vivian for a long time. When Eleanor and I first began quietly to build the other half of our lives, we had needed someone to manage it who was clever enough to grow it and discreet enough to bury it. And we had found her. In the years since, she had become, I think, the only person left on earth who knew the true measure of what I was. My son knew the small account. Vivian knew everything else. And that morning, for the first time, I was going to need her to know why it mattered. So I told her, not gently and not slowly. I told her that Marcus had brought a forged medical report to my shop, signed by a physician I had never met. I told her about the petition for conservatorship, about the staged incidents, about the $38,000 swept out of the local account with the words care deposit typed beside it. I heard her go quiet on the other end of the line, and I knew that in that quiet she was not gasping the way a friend gasps. She was already working, already turning the facts over, the way I turn a movement looking for the fault. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but it had steel under it now. Mr. Hale, I have to say this plainly because it's my job to. What you're describing is a federal matter. Forging a physician's certification, wire fraud if that transfer crossed state lines, elder financial abuse, which in this state carries its own severe penalties. I can have attorneys file an emergency petition this morning to freeze the conservatorship. I can have investigators at your son's door by this afternoon. Say the word and I will end this before lunch. It was the right advice. It was the advice a careful person gives. And I told her no. I told her no, and I want you to understand why, because it is the hinge the whole rest of this turns on. If I called down the law that morning, what would happen? Marcus and Sabrina would be arrested, yes, but they would lawyer up within the hour. They would weep to a judge about a confused old man and a family misunderstanding, and most of all, the moment the police knocked, whoever stood behind my son, whoever held the debt that had driven him to this, would vanish into the dark like a rat down a pipe, and I would never learn who they were. I did not only want to stop the theft, I wanted to understand the whole machine, every gear of it, all the way back to the mainspring. And you cannot study a machine while it is being smashed with a hammer. I don't want them stopped yet, I said. I want them watched, quietly, completely. I want you to put your people on Marcus and on Sabrina, and I want to know everything. Every account, every card, every loan, every property, every payment they've made and missed for the last 5 years. I want to know who they owe, how much, and how soon it's due. And I want it done without a single ripple they could feel. They cannot know anyone is looking. Can your people do that? There was the briefest pause, and then Vivian said in the tone of a woman rolling up her sleeves, "We call it a ghost protocol. We trace the whole footprint and leave none of our own. Nobody feels a thing." Then more carefully, "But Mr. Hale, an audit that thorough, moving that fast and that quietly is expensive. It means pulling my best forensic team off other work and putting them on this tonight. I need you to authorize the spend, and I need you to understand the scale of it. And here at last is the thing I have kept promising to explain. And it is time you had it, because Vivian was about to say the number out loud, and I want you to hear it the way Marcus never did. Vivian, I said, you manage the trust, so you already know the scale of what I can spend. Spend whatever it takes. Because the other half of my life, the half my son had never once suspected, was this. Eleanor and I had spent 40 years quietly gathering the rarest timepieces in the world, movements built by masters 2 centuries dead, along with the mechanical patents from my engineering years that had never stopped paying. It was held far from any account Marcus could see through the auction house and the private trust that Vivian ran with an iron hand. And it was worth, on the morning I made that call, a great deal more than my son, in his most greedy dream, could have imagined. He had schemed and forged and stolen and sold his own father to pay a debt. And all the while, he had been standing on a mountain, mistaking it for a molehill. Because I had spent his whole life teaching him not to look. Vivian was silent for a moment. I think even she had never expected to hear me open that door for such a reason. Understood, she said at last. I'll have the team moving within the hour. And Mr. Hale, I'll tell you now, if your son is as desperate as that swept account suggests, then he owes someone. And people that desperate never owe someone gentle. Give me 48 hours. Her voice dropped and the steel in it was cold and certain. Give me 48 hours and I will show you exactly who your son really owes. I set the phone back in its case and locked it away. In the front room, the clocks kept their patient count. 48 hours. It was, I would later understand, the most important 2 days of my life. Because at the end of them, I would learn that the debt behind my son was worse than I had let myself fear. And I would learn it just as a stranger in the rain began to circle my shop, working up the courage to knock. The next morning, I opened the shop as I always did, because a man wearing a mask must wear it everywhere, even in the hours when no one is watching, or he will forget one day to put it on. I turned the sign, I wound the display clocks, and I settled at my bench as though the world had not tilted beneath me. And across the room, Cora Bennett looked up from her own work and watched me for a little longer than she needed to. I should tell you properly about Cora, because I have kept promising she mattered, and now is when she begins to. She had come to me 3 years earlier, a young woman of 23, then with no family in the trade, and no reason anyone could see for loving a dying craft. But she had steady hands and a patient eye, and something rarer than either a genuine reverence for the way old things were made. Most young people who wandered into my shop wanted to know if the clocks were worth anything. Cora wanted to know how they worked. In 3 years, she had become less an assistant than the child of my trade, the one who would carry what I knew after I was gone. She knew my habits better than my own son did, and that, it turned out, was a thing my enemies had not counted on. Because Cora knew the way, you know the walk of someone you love, that something in me had changed overnight. She did not say so at first. She let the morning pass. But near midday, when the shop was empty and I was bent too long over a movement I had already finished, she set down her tools and came and stood at the end of my bench. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you didn't sleep, and you keep checking the door like you're expecting the tax man. What's happened?" I had not meant to tell her. I had built my whole strategy on being alone with the secret, on letting no one see the sane man behind the failing one. But there is a limit to what a person can carry without setting some of it down, and there was something in the plain steadiness of her that made the load lighter just by being near it. So I told her a piece of it. Not the trust, not Vivian, not the mountain my son did not know he stood on, but the folder, the forged report, the word dementia printed above my own name. She did not gasp. She did not tell me it must be a misunderstanding. She went very still, and then a hard, bright anger came into her face, the anger of the young when they see the old being cheated, and she said the thing I most needed to hear and had not dared say to myself aloud. "That's a lie. Anyone who spent 10 minutes with you knows that's a lie. You calibrated a chronometer to within 2 seconds a week last Tuesday. You are the least confused person I have ever met." She folded her arms. "So it's not about your mind. It's about your money, or your shop, or something you have that they want, isn't it?" I looked at that young woman for a long moment, and I felt the first warmth I had felt since the folder touched my bench. Because here was a witness. Not a hired one, not a bought one, but a true one. Someone who had watched me work every day for 3 years and could stand up in any courtroom in the world and swear my mind was whole. In a scheme built entirely on the lie of my decline, Cora Bennett was living proof against it, and she did not even know yet how much that would come to matter. "Something like that," I said. "And Cora, I need you to do something for me that will be difficult. I need you to keep working exactly as you always have, and I need you to say nothing, and above all, I need you to notice things. You see this shop more clearly than anyone. If anything is strange, if anyone comes asking about me, I want to know." She frowned then, and she was quiet a moment, and I saw her turning something over. "That's odd that you say that," she said slowly, "because there is something strange. I didn't think anything of it until now." She glanced toward the front window, toward the lane. "There's been a man. 3 times this week I've seen him. He parks across the street and he sits in his car and he looks at the shop. He doesn't come in. Yesterday he got as far as the door. I saw him reach for the handle, and then he just stopped and turned around and walked back to his car and drove off. Middle-aged, nice coat, nervous. He looked Mr. Hale. He looked like a man trying to make himself do something he was afraid to do." Something went very quiet inside me. "Did you see his face?" I asked. "A little, pale, tired, like he hadn't slept either." She hesitated. "Do you know him?" I did not know him. That was precisely the point. I did not know him, and there was one name in this whole affair attached to a man I did not know. A man whose signature had appeared on a page swearing he had looked into my eyes and found my mind gone. A man who, if he had any conscience left at all, might now be sitting in a car across the street from the very shop he had helped condemn, reaching for a door he could not bring himself to open. I did not say the name aloud, but I turned it over in the dark of my mind, the way you turn a strange gear you have found lying loose inside a case, a gear that does not belong to any train you can yet see, and you know it means the machine is not built the way you thought. Julian Foss, the doctor I had never met. And perhaps if the rain that was gathering outside my window kept its promise, the doctor I was about to. The rain came that same evening, the slow, heavy rain that Savannah gets in the warm months, the kind that falls straight down and turns the lane to a black mirror. I had sent Cora home. I had stayed on at the bench past closing the shop, dark but for the single lamp over my work, because I had a feeling, the way you feel a storm in an old joint before the sky admits to it, that this was the night the man in the car would finally cross the street. I was right. A little after 9, I heard over the patient ticking and the drum of the rain the sound of a car door. Then footsteps, slow stopping, starting again. Then at last, a knock. Not the confident knock of a customer, a soft, hesitant knock, knuckles that half hoped no one would answer. I went to the door and I opened it, and there he stood under the small awning with the rain sheeting down behind him, middle-aged as Cora had said, a good coat soaked through at the shoulders, a soft, tired, frightened face, the face of a man who had not slept in some time and who was not sure even now that he should be here. "Mr. Hale," he said. His voice shook. "You don't know me. My name is Julian Foss. I'm a doctor." He swallowed. "I'm the doctor who signed the report about your mind. I will not pretend to you that I stayed perfectly calm. My heart struck once hard like the hour bell of a great clock. Here was the loose gear, the pivot, the whole machine turned on, standing dripping on my doorstep. Every instinct I had built over the last days told me to be careful to give away nothing to keep the mask of the failing old man fixed in place until I understood what this man wanted. So I did not invite him in at once. I stood in the doorway, and I let a little of the tremor they wanted to see come into my own voice. And I said only, 'The doctor. Yes, I have never met you.' 'No,' he said, and something broke a little in his face. 'No, you haven't. That's the whole terrible point, isn't it? I signed a legal document swearing I examined a man I had never seen.' The rain hammered on the awning above us. I have driven to this street 4 times this week. 4 times. And 3 times I turned around and drove home like a coward. I couldn't make myself knock because I knew that the moment I did, I could never undo it. But I can't sleep, Mr. Hale. I close my eyes, and I see my own signature on that page, and I see what it's going to do to you, and I can't. I can't carry it anymore." I studied him in the lamplight. 50 years of watching how metal fails, how strain shows itself in a thing before it breaks, had taught me to read the same in a man, and everything I read in Julian Foss was strain. The clenched hands, the wet red-rimmed eyes that could not hold mine for more than a moment. This was not a man come to threaten me, nor a man sent to test whether I had noticed the forgery. This was a man in the last stage of a private collapse, the moment when guilt finally overwhelms fear. "They lied to me," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "I need you to understand that first before you decide what I am. They came to me weeks ago, your son, and his wife, mostly his wife. They told me you were declining, that they were desperate, that the family couldn't get you to a specialist because you refused to go, that you were a danger to yourself. They had records, household details, your medications, things only a family would know. They made it sound like a mercy, like all I was doing was putting a signature to a truth everyone already knew. And they paid me. God help me, I let them pay me. I was in a hard place of my own, and I told myself it was harmless, and I signed it." He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment, gathering himself. "And then," he said, "a few days later, I did something I should have done before I ever picked up the pen. I looked. I found the earlier filings. I saw how fast they were moving on the conservatorship. I saw the transfer they'd already set up out of your accounts before the ink on my report was even dry. And I understood that I hadn't certified a sad family truth. I'd handed 2 frightened, greedy people the legal key to a living man's entire existence. And I started to wonder what else they'd lied to me about, and what they actually intended to do with you once the court handed you over." The rain filled the silence between us. Somewhere behind me a clock began to strike the 1/4 hour, and both of us flinched at the small, bright sound. I did want to believe him. I want to be honest about that, because a lonely man betrayed by his own blood is hungry for an honest face. And that hunger is itself a danger. But I had not survived this far by believing what I wished to believe. A confession is only as good as what stands behind it, and I did not yet know whether Julian Foss had come to help me or to save himself, or whether he was some further gear in a machine even more elaborate than I feared, sent to win my trust so it could be used against me. So I did not thank him. I did not weep with him or clasp his hand. I stood in my doorway with the rain at his back, and I looked into that ruined, hopeful face, and I asked him the only question that mattered. "Dr. Foss," I said quietly, "a guilty man can confess to a priest, or to a lawyer, or to the police. But you did not go to any of them. You came here in the dark, in the rain, to me. So before I let you through this door, you are going to tell me the truth. Why did you come here? What is it exactly that you want from me?" For a moment, he did not answer. The rain filled the space where his words should have been, and I watched him weigh whether to give me the polished answer or the true one. To his credit, he chose the true one. "What do I want?" he repeated softly. "I've asked myself that on every one of those 4 drives over here. I told myself I wanted to warn you. That sounds noble. But if I'm honest, standing here, I think I came because I wanted to stop being the man who did this. And I can't stop being him by staying home. The only way out of what I've done is through it, through your door." He looked at me then and held my eyes for the first time. "I don't want your forgiveness, Mr. Hale. I haven't earned it, and I may never. What I want is to help you destroy the thing I helped them build. That's all. That's the only thing that lets me sleep again. I have listened to a great many men in my life, and I have learned that the truth has a particular sound. An unpolished, uneven sound. Like a movement running without oil. Lies run smooth. Julian Foss did not run smooth. So I stepped back from the doorway and I let him in out of the rain. He came in dripping and stood among the ticking clocks, turning his hat in his hands like a man in a church he does not feel worthy of. And I sat him down at the customer's chair by the counter, and I did not offer him anything because trust is a thing that is earned in pieces. And he had earned only the first piece, which was a dry roof. Then I said, "Tell me all of it, from the beginning, and Dr. Foss, understand that I will be able to tell if you leave anything out." So he told me, and in the telling, the last of the machine's hidden works came into the light. He had been in trouble of his own, he said, a malpractice matter settled quietly that had drained his savings and left his practice hanging by a thread. He was the kind of man my son and his wife go looking for, a professional with a credential and a weakness, a signature for sale to anyone who knew how to find the seam. It had been Sabrina who found him. It was almost always Sabrina, he said, and Marcus who stood behind her, looking sick. She had come with a story so complete, so sorrowful, so backed with genuine family details that a man who wanted to believe it could believe it, and he had wanted to. That, he said, was his true crime. Not that he was fooled, but that he had let himself be because the money solved a problem, and the story let him keep his self-respect. "But here is the part," Foss said, leaning forward, "that I think you most need to hear, and it is the part that turned me. When I began to have doubts, I went back to Sabrina, and I told her I wasn't comfortable, that I wanted to actually examine you before anything went to a judge. And she smiled at me, Mr. Hale, and she said there wouldn't be any need for that because you wouldn't be contesting anything. She said it in a way that made my blood go cold. Not you won't win a contest, you won't be in a position to contest. As though your ability to stand up in that courtroom and speak for yourself was already being arranged out of existence." The clocks ticked. I felt the cold of it move through me because it confirmed the shape of a fear I had not yet spoken even to Vivian. That the conservatorship was not the end of their plan. It was the door to it. "I don't know the whole of what they intend," Foss went on. "They didn't tell me, and I didn't want to know, and that cowardice is on me too. But I know they are frightened of someone. I heard Sabrina on the phone once in the hall outside my office, and she wasn't the smooth woman she is to your face. She was begging, pleading with someone about time, about how much time she needed. Whatever they owe, and to whomever, it is bigger and worse than a stolen checking account. This whole thing the report the court, It's all just them trying to reach something before a clock they're terrified of runs out. I thought of Vivian out there in the dark, with her ghost protocol 48 hours to lay bare exactly that. And I thought that the picture was assembling itself now, from two directions at once. Hers from the money, and this man's from the inside. And that where the two met, I would find the whole truth. Dr. Foss, I said, you understand that a repentant conscience by itself is worth very little in a courtroom. My son's lawyers will paint you as a bribed man trying to save his own skin by turning on his employers. Your word against theirs is not enough. I need proof. Hard, cold, documented proof that this report was false, that no examination ever occurred, that you were fed those details by Marcus and Sabrina and paid to sign. Without that, you are just one more voice, and mine, calling my son a thief, and we will both look like the mad and the disgraced. And here Julian Foss did something I did not expect. A strange, tired, almost frightening calm came over him. The calm of a man who has already crossed the worst river and has nothing left to fear from the water. He reached into the inner pocket of his soaked coat, and he drew out a small folded envelope, dry, protected against his chest, and he set it on the counter between us with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. I was a coward, he said quietly, but I was a careful coward. From the very first meeting, some instinct I'm not proud of told me these people would one day try to make me the one who takes the fall. So I protected myself the only way I knew how. He tapped the envelope once. I kept a second set of records, Mr. Hale. Every meeting, every payment with dates and amounts, every message they sent me, every household detail they fed me to put in that report in their own words, in their own handwriting and their own texts. Everything they told me, everything they made me sign, it's all here, and I am giving it to you. Julian Foss left near midnight, and I did not sleep, but this time it was not grief that kept me awake. It was work. I had two halves of a truth now, his envelope on my counter and Vivian's audit still gathering in the dark. And I knew that when the two met, the whole shape of the thing would finally stand clear. I did not have to wait long. Vivian was faster than her promise. It was not yet the end of her 48 hours when the locked phone in my desk drawer lit up with a single message. The file is ready. Read it alone. I read it alone. I have spent my life among precise things, and I will tell you that Vivian Reyes builds a financial report the way a master builds a movement. Every part fitted, nothing loose, the whole of it turning toward one inevitable conclusion. Her people had done exactly as she said. They had traced the entire footprint of my son's life and his wife's, and they had left no fingerprint of their own. And what they had found lay before me now on the screen, in cold. Orderly rows that told a story far worse than the one I had let myself imagine. The house was not theirs. It looked like theirs. It photographed like theirs. But it was mortgaged past its own value, borrowed against twice and 3 payments behind. The imported cars were leased, and one of the leases was already in default. Sabrina's consulting business, the one she wore like a crown at every family dinner, was an empty shell. A registered name with no clients, no contracts, no income. Nothing behind it but a bank account that money passed through on its way to somewhere else. The success they had draped themselves in was not thin. It was not even there. It was a painted backdrop, and behind it, the two of them had been falling for a long time. But it was where they had fallen to that made me set the phone down and sit very still in the dark. Because Sabrina had not simply overspent. She had, over the past 2 years, been pouring borrowed money into a private investment fund, the kind that promises impossible returns to people too proud or too frightened to ask the obvious questions. Vivian's note beside it was blunt. This is not a legitimate fund. Every marker of a fraud. And Sabrina, chasing the losses the way a gambler chases a bad hand, had borrowed more and more to feed it, until the money she was feeding it was no longer money any honest lender would give her. She had gone in the end to the only people who would still say yes. Vivian had traced the loans to a private lending operation that dressed itself in corporate clothing, but was underneath the paperwork something much older and much simpler. Men who lend to the desperate at rates the law does not allow, and who collect not through the courts, but through fear. The kind of people who do not send a letter when a payment is late. The kind who send a person. Vivian had attached what her team had pulled from the edges of their communications, and the messages were short and cold and left nothing to interpret. They did not threaten in words. They did not have to. They simply named a figure and named a date and let the silence after do the work. The figure was large enough that I read it twice to be sure the screen had not doubled a digit. And the date. The date was what turned my blood to still water. They were out of time. Not out of time in some vague future sense. The final demand, the one that came after all the others, gave Marcus and Sabrina a matter of days, not weeks, to produce a payment they could not possibly make out of a life that was already sold to the studs. And the sum they had to produce first, just to buy themselves a little breath, was far more than my swept checking account, far more than the shop, far more than anything they could squeeze from a slow and lawful conservatorship. And there it was. The mainspring of the whole machine laid bare at last. I had wondered why the scheme moved so fast, why the report was rushed and the incidents crudely staged, and the money grabbed before the ink was dry. Now I understood. They were not working to a plan. They were working to a clock held by dangerous men, and every cruel and clumsy thing they had done to me was the flailing of two people who could hear it ticking down. The conservatorship suddenly made a terrible, complete kind of sense. They did not want to slowly manage an old man's modest estate. They needed immediately total and unquestioned legal control over everything I owned, so they could liquidate it all at once, the shop, the house, whatever they believed I had, and throw it into the pit of that debt before the men holding the clock came to collect. And I understood, sitting there, exactly why Sabrina had told Foss I would not be in a position to contest anything. Because a conservatorship can be fought by the person it imprisons, if that person is alive and can reach a courtroom. But it cannot be fought by a man who has been quietly moved somewhere he can no longer speak, no longer sign, no longer be found. They were not trying to take my life's work. They were running out of time to take my life. I sat alone in the dark shop with the two halves of the truth finally joined Foss's envelope on the counter. Vivian's file glowing in my hand, and the 40 clocks around me counting the same seconds that were counting down for Marcus and Sabrina, though they did not yet know that their clock and mine had become the same instrument. And in the quiet, I understood that I was no longer a father deciding how to punish a wayward son. I was a man deciding how to survive, because whatever they intended for me, they intended it soon. And the only question left was whether I would strike first. I did not answer that question alone. That was the change the last 2 days had worked in me, and I want you to notice it because a proud and solitary man learning at 69 to lean on others is not a small thing. The next afternoon, I closed the shop early, and I gathered the only two people in the world I now trusted. Cora at her bench, and Julian Foss come quietly through the back, and I laid everything on the long work table between us. His envelope, Vivian's file, printed now onto paper I could touch. The forged report. All of it spread out under the good lamp like the disassembled parts of a single great machine, so that 3 sets of eyes could see what one alone might miss. It was Cora who found the thing that changed everything, and she found it because she looks at the world the way I taught her to look at a movement, assuming that every part is there for a reason and asking what each one does. She had been reading through the details of the conservatorship petition, the names on it, the officials, the small print no one is meant to read. And she stopped, and she went back and she put her finger on a name. "This facility," she said, "the one named here as the proposed residence for your care. And this doctor's practice address and this filing agent." She looked up. "Mr. Hale, I've seen these names before. Not here, in the paper. Months ago." She was already reaching for her phone, already searching her young hands quick. There was a story, a small one buried. An elderly woman, no close family nearby, put under a conservatorship by a court. And by the time a distant nephew came asking questions, her house was sold, and most of her money was gone, and she'd been moved to a facility where she died within a few months. There was a complaint. It went nowhere. But the names. She turned the phone so I could see, and there they were. The same facility, the same cluster of names orbiting it. And Julian Foss, reading over my shoulder, made a low sound in his throat because he recognized one of them too. A filing agent he had assumed was simply my son's, and understood in that moment that he had not been the first bribed signature this operation had ever purchased. We sat with that for a while, the three of us, and the ticking of the clocks was very loud. Because it meant this was not a crime of passion. It was not even at its root a crime of my own family. My son and his wife drowning in their private death had not invented this scheme in their fear. They had found it. They had gone looking for a way to turn a living, breathing, inconvenient old man into liquid cash. And they had found a machine already built for exactly that purpose. An arrangement of a compliant facility, a friendly filing agent, a doctor willing to sign. All of it wearing the clean and lawful clothes of the conservatorship system, the very system the law had built to protect people like me. It was designed to look like mercy. It was designed to leave no fingerprints because every cruel step of it was on paper perfectly legal. A judge's signature, a doctor's certification, a caring family, a quiet facility. And at the end of it, an old person erased so smoothly that the only people who might have objected were the ones being erased. I had thought I was fighting my son. I understood now that my son was only the newest hand to reach for a lever that other hands had pulled before on other old men and women who had no watchmaker's eye to see the machine closing around them, and no young apprentice to remember a buried story, and no Vivian in the dark, and no doctor who could not sleep. They had not survived it. Their houses had been sold. Their names had become small stories that went nowhere. They had been counted out, one soft tick at a time, and no one had come. Something settled in me then, and it was colder and larger than any feeling I had about my own son. Marcus had done a terrible thing to me, and I would deal with Marcus. But behind Marcus was a thing that had done this before and would do it again to someone's mother, someone's father, someone with no one to see. And I found sitting at that table, between a repentant doctor and a furious young woman, that I no longer wished merely to save myself. I wished to take the whole machine apart in the open, in the daylight, in a way that could not be filed away into a story that went nowhere. But to do that, I could not move too soon. That was the discipline the moment demanded. If I struck now, if I exposed the forged report and froze the accounts today, I would save myself and only myself. Marcus and Sabrina would scatter. The facility, the agent, the practiced machinery behind them would simply wait for the next frightened family and the next unwatched old man. To catch the whole of it, I needed them to keep believing they had won. I needed them to walk the entire scheme, every step, right up to the final door, with their guard down and their mouths loose, while I stood inside the trap wearing the face of the helpless victim they had already written me to be. I looked at Cora and at Foss, and I told them what I had decided. And I told it to them quietly, the way you say a thing you know you cannot take back. They have built a machine that runs on one thing, I said. A weak old man too confused to fight. Very well. If that is the part they need, then that is the part I will play. I am going to give them the most convincing helpless old man they have ever seen. I am going to let them lead me all the way to the last room of their plan. And I am going to give them the finest performance of my life. The performance began the next morning, and I will tell you that the hardest role a proud man can play is the role of a man with nothing left to be proud of. I called Marcus. I let my voice do the thing I had watched Sabrina teach the whole world to expect of me. I let it waver. I let it lose the thread of its own sentences and circle back and apologize for circling back. I told him I had been thinking about the papers, about the doctor, about the kind things he and Sabrina had said, and that perhaps they were right. Perhaps I had been more confused lately than I wanted to admit. I told him I was frightened of being alone, and that I did not want to fight my own son, and that if he thought this facility was best for me, then I supposed I would trust him, because who else did an old man have to trust but his boy? There was a silence on the line, and in that silence I could hear him believing me, and it was the loneliest sound I have ever heard. "That's good, Dad," he said, and there was relief in it, real relief, and underneath the relief something I understood now to be fear, draining away for a moment. "That's really good. You're doing the right thing. Sabrina and I will come by. We'll bring the paperwork and we'll walk you through all of it, and you won't have to worry about anything." They came that afternoon, and before they came, I had made my preparations, because a man does not walk into a trap of his own building without checking the spring first. Foss had given me more than his envelope. He had given me his understanding of these two people, how they spoke when they thought no one careful was listening. And Cora had given me her steady hands and her quick mind. Between the three of us, we had done a simple thing and a legal one. In a place like Georgia, a person may record his own conversations in his own home and his own shop, and so I had. In the drawer beneath my workbench, and again in the small back room where they would surely take me to talk privately, placed 2 recorders, running patient, catching every word. I had spent my life making instruments that measure exactly what happens. Now I would let them measure my son. When Marcus and Sabrina arrived, I met them as the man they wished to meet. I fumbled the latch on my own door. I called Sabrina by the wrong name and then apologized for it, watching her file the moment away with satisfaction. I let Marcus take my elbow as though I might fall, and I let him lead me to my own back room and sit me in my own chair, and I folded my oil-stained hands in my lap and looked up at the two of them with the mild, hopeful, frightened face of a man surrendering. And it worked exactly as I had known it would, because the terrible truth about people who have decided you are helpless is that they stop performing for you. They spoke over my head. They spoke as though I were a piece of furniture that happened to be breathing, and in that carelessness, the thing I needed began at last to come out. "The hearing set for Friday," Sabrina said to Marcus, not troubling to lower her voice. "Once the judge signs, we don't wait. The listing on the house goes up the same day we've already got the agent lined up. The shop and whatever's in it gets appraised and moved fast." She glanced at me, and there was no more warmth in her eyes than there is in the glass face of a clock. "And him, we move him Saturday, before he can talk to anyone who might slow this down." "Saturday's fast," Marcus said, and there was that thing in his voice again that flinched the last soft place in him. "Dad, the facility, it's a nice place. They'll take good care of you. It's the best thing. It's the safest thing." "Of course it is," I murmured, nodding agreeable lost. "Whatever you think is best." But Sabrina was not listening to either of us. Sabrina had that tight, distracted brightness I recognized now from Vivian's file. The manner of a person doing arithmetic against a deadline only they can see. She stepped away toward the window and her phone was in her hand. And she said, half to Marcus and half to no one, "It has to be enough. It has to close in time. If it doesn't close by the end of the month, it doesn't matter how good the facility is, because they aren't going to wait." And you know what they said they'd do. Marcus went pale and hushed her and glanced at me, and Sabrina caught herself, and for one instant, the two of them looked at me with a flicker of doubt, wondering if the furniture had heard. I gave them nothing. I let my eyes drift vague and untroubled to the clock on the wall, and I asked in a small, confused voice whether it was nearly time for my supper, and I watched the doubt leave their faces as quickly as it had come. Of course he hadn't understood. Look at him. He can't even remember when he eats. But I had heard. And the recorders in the drawer in the wall had heard every word of it. The hearing on Friday, the house listed. The same day the shop stripped and me moved. On Saturday, before I could talk to anyone who might slow it down. It was almost enough. Almost. I had the theft on tape now, plainly. What I did not yet have, what I could feel them circling but had not yet said aloud, was the thing beneath the theft, the thing Sabrina had come so close to naming at the window. What they said they'd do, the shape of the pit they were all falling toward, and what exactly the two of them had agreed would become of me once I was moved on Saturday to a place with no visitor logs and no questions asked. I had one more scene to let them play, and I already dreaded what my son's voice would sound like when he finally said the rest of it out loud. The last scene came the evening before the Friday hearing, and I did not have to coax it out of them. They handed it to me freely because they had grown so sure of my helplessness that they no longer guarded even their cruelest words. They arrived jangling with a nervous energy, the electricity of people standing at the edge of something they have wanted badly and can hardly believe is about to arrive. Sabrina carried a bottle of wine. They did not offer me any. They settled among my clocks in the front room, and beneath the workbench the recorder turned its patient circle, and I sat in my chair with my eyes half closed, playing the dozing old man, while my son and his wife laid out the end of it over my sleeping head. It was Marcus who said it. I had always assumed if this moment ever came, that Sabrina's cold voice would speak the unspeakable part, and that my son would only flinch beside her the way he always did. But it was Marcus. Perhaps the wine loosened him. Perhaps a man who has decided on a monstrous thing needs at last to hear himself say it aloud, to make it real, to share its weight with the one other person who already knows. "So the transport comes Saturday," he said low, "and you're certain about the place. You're certain it's the right kind of place." "It's the only kind that works," Sabrina answered. "A normal facility keeps records, real doctors who'd actually look at him and notice he isn't demented at all and start asking why he's even there. This place doesn't do any of that. You pay, they take him, they don't ask questions, and they don't let questions in. No visitors we haven't approved, no calls out. He goes in, and to the rest of the world, he's just a sick old man being cared for quietly until—" She let the word hang. She did not finish it. But Marcus, my Marcus, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in a lane not far from this shop, the boy whose fevers I had sat up through, made himself finish it in a voice gone flat and strange. "Until his heart gives out," he said. "That's what you mean. An old man medicated stressed in a place like that. A few months, maybe less, and nobody investigates because it's exactly what everyone already expects. He was old, he was sick, he faded, and then—" He stopped. "And then the estate settles to his conservator." Sabrina said softly, "Which is you, which is us. And it's over. The debt, the calls, all of it, gone." The clocks ticked. I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing slow and even, the breathing of a sleeping man, though I will tell you honestly that it took everything my trade had ever taught me to keep that breath from breaking. Because I had suspected this. Foss had warned me of its shape. Vivian's file had drawn its outline. But there is a terrible difference between deducing a thing and hearing it spoken in your own child's voice a few feet from your face, while he believes you cannot understand. They were not going to take my house and my shop and leave me to grow old somewhere small and sad. That I could have survived. No. They were going to move me to a place built for the purpose of making inconvenient people disappear. A place with no records and no witnesses, and leave me there to be quietly medicated toward an early, unremarkable, unquestioned death, so the estate would pass to my son, and the men holding the clock would be paid, and the whole thing would close over my life like water over a dropped stone. They had not merely decided to rob me, they had decided that I would die on a schedule, because my death was the only figure that balanced their arithmetic. And the thing that broke something in me for good was not Sabrina's part in it. Sabrina was a stranger who had married into my blood and had never, I understood now, seen me as anything but an obstacle attached to a bank account. I could hate Sabrina cleanly. It was Marcus. It was that he had said the words "until his heart gives out" in the voice of the child I had loved more than my own life, and that having said them, he had not wept, had not risen, had not thrown his glass against the wall, and shouted that he could not do this to his father. He had simply gone quiet, and then reached over and refilled Sabrina's glass, and the two of them had gone on drinking in my front room, planning the month of my death, while the man they meant to kill sat 3 feet away, pretending to sleep so that he might live. Something in me that had been a father for 43 years grew very still that night, and then it stopped, the way a clock stops, not with any drama, only a last small motion, and then silence. I had come into that room, hoping somewhere beneath all my strategy that my son would fail to say it, that there was a floor even he would not fall through. There was not. And when I understood there was not, I stopped grieving the son I had lost. Because you cannot grieve forever a thing that is simply gone. They left near midnight, cheerful and unburdened, sure of their Friday and their Saturday and their quiet, clean ending. I sat alone among my clocks long after the door closed, and when at last I opened my eyes in the dark, they were dry and they were steady, and the man behind them was no longer anybody's father. He was the man who held every second of it on tape, and he had one day, exactly one before their clock ran out, to make certain the only ending anyone got was the one he chose. I have been asked since whether I hated my son that night. It is the wrong question, and I understood even then that it was the wrong question, so let me answer the right one instead. I did not hate Marcus. Hatred is a thing you feel toward a person. What I felt sitting alone in the dark after they had gone was closer to what an engineer feels standing before a bridge that has failed and killed the people crossing it. Not hatred. A cold, total need to understand exactly how it broke, so that I would never again mistake such a structure for something that could bear weight. So I spent that last night taking my son apart, the way I had taken apart the folder and the machine. And I will share with you what I found, because it is the truest and the hardest thing in this whole story. I had believed for 43 years that somewhere inside Marcus was a floor, a place he would not go below. Every father believes this. We believe it because we need to, because to raise a child is to pour yourself into a vessel you cannot see the bottom of, and you tell yourself the bottom is sound. I had watched that afternoon over the rim of my false sleep for the moment my son's floor would hold. I had waited for him to say the word until and then break, to stand up and knock the wine from his wife's hand, and become again, even for one instant, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. He had not broken. And in not breaking, he had told me the thing I had refused my whole life to learn. There was no floor. There had never been a floor. There had only been a son who had never yet been asked to fall, and who, when finally asked, fell all the way. But here's the part I want you to hold on to, because it is the part that matters most, and it is the part people misunderstand. Marcus was not a monster. I have thought about this a great deal, and I am certain of it. A monster would have been easier. Marcus was a coward, which is a far more ordinary and far more dangerous thing. He did not want me dead. I believe that. If you had asked him in some other life whether he could sit 3 feet from his sleeping father and plan the month of that father's death, he would have wept and sworn he never could. And yet he did. And the reason he did was not cruelty. It was that he was more afraid of the men holding the clock than he was ashamed of what he was doing to me. His fear was simply larger than his conscience, and when the two of them were set on the scale against each other, the fear won, and it kept winning, one small surrender at a time, until it had carried him all the way to my front room with a bottle of wine and a schedule for my dying. That is how it happens, I think, to most men who do terrible things. Not in one great choice, but in 100 small refusals to choose the harder thing. Marcus had not decided to kill me. He had merely again and again declined to save me because saving me was frightening and expensive and required him to face the men he owed, and it was so much easier to let the machine do the deciding for him. He had made himself a passenger in his own crime so that he might tell himself, even at the end, that he had never truly held the wheel. I understood all of this. And understanding it, I found that the last of my grief burned away and left something clean and hard behind. Because a father can forgive a son a great deal, a father can forgive weakness and foolishness and even cruelty born of pain. But I could not, and I did not forgive the arithmetic. He had weighed my life against his fear and found my life to be the lighter thing. He had set the years I spent raising him, the nights, the school fees, the patient hours teaching his small hands to be careful against a debt he was ashamed to face, and he had decided that all of it, all of me, was worth less than his own comfort. He had priced his father, and a thing that has been priced can be sold, and a thing that can be sold has stopped being family and become merely property. Very well. If I was property to him, then I would teach him what it means to be outbid. I rose from the chair as the first gray light came into the shop, and I felt the strange steadiness of a man who has finished mourning and may now simply act. I looked at the recorders in their hiding places, holding every word of Friday's hearing and Saturday's transport, and the quiet, clean death they had planned for me. I looked at Foss's envelope. I thought of Vivian waiting in the dark for my word. And I thought of the debt. The great terrible clock that Marcus was so afraid of that he would kill to quiet it. And I understood with the sudden clarity of a movement that finally runs true, exactly where the whole machine could be turned against itself. They were afraid of the men who held their debt. Everything, all of it, the report, the court, my scheduled death was only two frightened people running from that one great fear. Take away that fear, and the whole machine had nothing left to run on. But I did not intend to take it away. I intended to take it over. I intended to become the very thing they were most afraid of, to buy the clock they were running from and hold it in my own hand. And then to stand in front of my son at the last possible moment and let him understand fully that the debt he had killed his father to escape now belonged to that same father. My son had put his name to a paper that signed my life away. He had done it in ink before a bribed doctor with a patient smile. Now I decided, watching the light come up over 50 years of clocks, I would sign his. I called Vivian at 6 in the morning, and this time I did not let my voice waver, because there was no longer anyone to perform for. The frightened old man was a costume I would put on again for exactly one more day, and then never again. To Vivian, I spoke as myself. I heard the whole of it last night, I told her. It's recorded lawfully, every word. The hearing is today, the transport is tomorrow. And I know now what tomorrow was meant to be. They intend to move me somewhere I would not come back from. I said it plainly, and I heard her breath catch, and I went on before she could turn it into a rescue. So listen carefully, because I am not going to ask you to save me. I am going to ask you to do something hard. Anything, she said. And I believed her. The debt, I said. The one behind all of this. The one they are so afraid of that my son can plan my death to escape it. I want it. I want you to buy it. There was a silence. And then Vivian, being Vivian, did not waste it on shock. Tell me exactly what you mean, she said. Because there are two very different things you could mean, and one of them saves them, and one of them owns them. You know which one I mean, I said. And she did. Because here is the thing about a debt like the one my son carried. To the men who hold it, it is not sacred. It is not personal. It is an asset, a piece of paper that entitles the holder to a sum of money, and to whatever violence they are prepared to use to collect it. And an asset can be sold. Men like that would far rather be paid in full, cleanly, and at once by a quiet buyer than spend months squeezing frightened people who may in the end have nothing to squeeze. Vivian's people, moving through the same shadowed channels her forensic team had already mapped, could approach the holders of that debt not as victims and not as police, but as a discreet third party offering to purchase the note outright for cash. No questions, no names. You want to acquire the paper? Vivian said slowly, working it as she spoke. Pay them what they're owed. Take assignment of the full obligation. And then the debt that Marcus and Sabrina owe to dangerous men, they would instead owe. To me, I said. To a holding company you control with my name nowhere near it. Every dollar, every term, every right of collection those men held transferred lawfully to me. You understand what that makes you, she said quietly. It makes you their creditor. The very thing they've been running from. You'd be holding the clock. I am not saving them, Vivian, I said, and I heard how cold my own voice had become, and I did not flinch from it. Make no mistake about that. If I only wanted to save them, I would call the police this morning and let the law grind them slowly and let those men vanish to prey on the next family. That is mercy, and they have not earned mercy. And worse, it would not stop the machine. No, I am not saving my son. I am purchasing him. I am buying the one thing in this world he is most afraid of, so that when the moment comes, I can hold it up in front of his face and let him understand that there is no man left to run to, because I am now the man he owes. Vivian was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was something in her voice I had not heard in 15 years of working with her. Something like awe and something like grief for me. I can do it, she said. For a full cash payout of the balance, they'll move within the day. They always do. Money now beats money maybe every time with men like that. I'll route it through 3 shells so the origin is buried. To them, it will simply look like a larger, colder operation bought out their local interest. They'll sign the note over without a single question and be glad of it. She paused. But Mr. Hale, Once I do this, there is no undoing it. You will hold your son's life in your hands as completely as he tried to hold yours. Are you certain that's what you want to be? I looked around the shop as the morning came up gold through the front window, across 50 years of clocks, across Eleanor's hand, still somehow present in the placement of every one of them across the bench, where I had taught a young woman named Cora that a broken thing can always be understood by anyone patient enough to take it apart. And I thought of the old woman whose name Cora had found in that buried story and the ones before her. Counted out one soft tick at a time while no one came. I am certain, I said. Do it, buy the debt, and leave the hearing alone and leave the transport alone. Let them believe they've won right up to the last second. Let my son walk into my shop tomorrow morning thinking he is coming to collect a helpless man and ship him off to die. I want him to have every reason to feel safe. And then I am going to show him exactly who he has been running from all along. It will be done by nightfall, Vivian said. The paper will be yours before their hearing is even cold. And then softer. What do you want me to do tomorrow? I told her. I told her to come herself in the morning dressed for war and to bring the 2 men she trusted most and the signed and certified assignment of the debt and copies of every page of her file. I told her Foss would be there and Cora, and that between the tape and the envelope and the note in my hand, we would have not one weapon but 3 aimed at not one enemy, but the whole machine behind. Then I set the phone back in its case and I locked the drawer and I went to the window and turned the sign to open because the last thing a hunted man does before the trap closes is behave one final time exactly as the hunters expect. My son thought tomorrow was the morning he would finish erasing me. It was the morning I had chosen instead to give him back every second he had stolen with interest. They came on Saturday morning, exactly as they had promised they would, and I was ready for them in a way they could not have imagined. The hearing had gone through the day before. I had not fought it. I had let the machine turn one more time, let a judge who never laid eyes on me sign his name beneath a forged doctor's lie, because a trap that closes too early catches nothing. So on paper that Saturday morning, Marcus was already my conservator. On paper, I was already a man who no longer owned his own name. They believed the war was over and that they had come only to collect the spoils. I heard the transport van before I saw it, the heavy diesel idle of it pulling up outside my shop, and behind it, the smaller sound of my son's car. I stood in the back room and I did not tremble. And I want you to understand what a strange gift that stillness was after the days of performing its opposite. I had dressed that morning, not in the worn cardigan they knew, but in the one good suit I had kept from my engineering years, charcoal gray pressed, the suit of a man who commands rooms. On my wrist was a watch worth more than my son's car. In the front room, seated quietly among the clocks, was Vivian Reyes, and behind her stood 2 broad, still men in dark suits who had the particular calm of people who are very good at a serious profession. On the counter lay a leather folder that did not contain a forged report. It contained the truth. The bell above the door rang. I heard Marcus call out, his voice bright and businesslike, the voice of a man arriving to move furniture. "Dad, we're here. It's time to go now, the van's outside. Let's not make this hard." And Sabrina behind him, already brisk, already talking about the appraiser and the listing and the schedule. I let them come all the way in. I let them cross into the front room before either of them registered that the shop was not as they had left it. That there was a woman seated in the customer's chair who did not belong to their story, and 2 men standing who very much did not, and that the old cardigan was nowhere in sight. Marcus stopped so abruptly that Sabrina walked into his back. And then I stepped out of the back room in my gray suit, standing straight, and I looked at my son with clear and steady eyes, and I watched the whole architecture of his certainty begin very quietly to fall. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. My voice did not waver. It had not the slightest tremor in it, and I saw him hear that, saw him understand in some animal way before his mind could form the thought that something had gone terribly wrong. "Sabrina, sit down, both of you. We have a great deal to discuss, and very little time since I understand there is a van outside on a schedule." "Dad," Marcus said, and he tried to find the patient, careful voice he had used on me for weeks. "Dad, you're confused. "You need to come with us now," the doctor said. The doctor. I let the word fall into the room like a dropped tool. "Yes, let us begin with the doctor. Please, sit." They did not sit. But they did not leave either, because Vivian's 2 men had drifted without any drama at all to stand between my son and the door, and Marcus was beginning to understand the geometry of the room. I opened the leather folder on the counter. "Dr. Julian Foss," I said, "the physician who examined me thoroughly, who tested my memory and my judgment, who looked into my eyes and found my mind in ruins, and who signed his professional name and oath to a legal certification of my dementia. That doctor." I lifted the first page and turned it so they could see it. "I have spent 50 years, Marcus, learning to find the single flaw that brings down the whole design. And your entire beautiful machine rests on one certification by one doctor. So let me tell you what I know about that certification. I know that I was never examined. I know that I never sat in any room with any Dr. Foss. I know that the household details in that report, my address, your mother's name, the very pills in my cabinet, could only have come from one person alive who had a key to my house and my papers. You." Sabrina's face had gone smooth and hard, the face of a gambler recalculating. "You can't prove any of that," she said. "It's your word. The word of a man a court declared incompetent yesterday afternoon. Do you understand how that sounds? You sound exactly like the report says you'd sound." And she was right. That was the terrible elegance of the thing they had built, and she knew it. And for one instant, she let me see that she knew it, the flicker of triumph returning to her eyes. My word alone was worthless. A declared incompetent insisting on his own sanity was only proof of the diagnosis. To break the machine, I needed more than my word. I needed the one voice in the world that could not be dismissed. I needed the doctor himself. "You're right, Sabrina," I said quietly. "My word is not enough." I looked past her toward the back of the shop, toward the door to the little room where a man had been waiting in silence since before dawn. "Which is why I did not bring my word." And the door opened, and Julian Foss stepped out into the light among the clocks, pale and steady, with his own leather envelope in his hand, and looked directly at the 2 people who had bought his signature, and were about to learn what it had cost them. For a moment, no one in the room breathed. Sabrina's clever, recalculating face simply stopped the way a clock stops when a tooth finally shears, and Marcus made a small sound. Not a word, just an exhalation, as though he had been struck somewhere he could not defend. "Julian," Sabrina said at last, and I heard her fighting to put the smoothness back into her voice. "What are you doing here?" Foss did not answer her at first. He crossed the room slowly and set his leather envelope on the counter beside my folder, and only then did he look up. And when he did, he looked not at her, but at me. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I told you I would help you take it apart. I meant it." Then and only then he turned to face the 2 people who had bought him. "Sabrina, Marcus, I'm going to tell them everything. I've already told him, and I brought the records." "You signed that report," Sabrina said, and the smoothness was cracking, now splinters of something harder showing through. "You certified it. You're in this as deep as anyone. If you say one word against us, you go down with us. You lose your license, you lose everything. You'd be insane to." "I know," Foss said, and there was a strange peace in the way he said it. The peace of a man who has already counted the cost and decided to pay it. "I know exactly what it cost me. I've known for weeks. That's why I couldn't sleep. And I've decided I would rather lose my license than keep it at this price." He opened the envelope. "I'm a coward, Sabrina. You knew that about me from the start. It's why you chose me. But I was a careful coward. From the first meeting, I kept a copy of everything." He began to lay it on the counter, page by page, and the room filled with the quiet, damning rustle of paper. "Every meeting we had, with the date and the place," he said. "The 2 payments you made me, the amounts, the accounts they came from. The messages you sent me, all of them printed out with your number at the top. And this." He set down a single page, and his hand was steady now. "This is the list of household details you gave me to put into the report. Your handwriting, Sabrina. Mr. Hale's address, his late wife's name, his blood pressure medication, the layout of his house, written out for me so that a report describing a man I had never met would sound as though it had come from a real examination. You wrote it. I kept it. I watched my son during this. I want to tell you that I saw something break open in him, some remnant of shame. But what I saw was worse and simpler. I saw a man watching his escape route collapse. He was not ashamed. He was afraid. His eyes moved from the papers to the two silent men by the door to me in my gray suit, and I could see him doing arithmetic again, the same cold arithmetic he had always done, searching for the angle, the exit, the person he could blame. "Dad," he said, and he tried. God help him. He tried the old voice one last time. "Dad, listen to me. This isn't Foss. Is lying. He's trying to save himself. He came to you and made all this up because he knows he's in trouble. You can't trust a word. He's a bribed doctor. He'll say anything." He is a bribed doctor. I agreed. You should know. You bribed him. But you have made the same mistake with him that you made with me, Marcus. You decided he was only one thing, a weak man you could use, and you stopped watching him. And weak men, it turns out, sometimes find the one hard thing they will not do. I laid my hand flat on the pages Foss had spread. This is not his word against yours. This is your handwriting, your account numbers, your text messages. A court cannot dismiss a man's own handwriting the way it dismisses an old man's protest. Everything your whole machine was built to prevent, a voice that could not be waved away, is now sitting on this counter. That was when Sabrina abandoned the smooth voice entirely, because the smooth voice is a tool you use when you still believe you can manage a situation. And she had just understood that she could not. She rounded on me, and the mask came off, and behind it was something raw and vicious and cornered. "You think a stack of paper changes anything?" Her voice climbed sharp and shaking, filling the shop, rattling against the glass faces of the clocks. "You senseless old man playing dress-up in a good suit. A court declared you incompetent yesterday. Yesterday. Whatever this is, whatever he thinks he has, you are a legally incapacitated person, and Marcus is your conservator, and this shop and this house and everything in them belongs to us now. You have no standing. You have no money. You have nothing but a bitter grudge and a guilty doctor, and I will bury both of you in so much litigation you'll die of old age before a single word of it reaches a judge. You have no power here, Edmund. You have never had any power. Now get in the van." The room went very still. Vivian did not move. Foss did not move. My son stared at his wife with an expression I could not read. And I, standing among 50 years of clocks in the morning light, felt something almost like gratitude toward Sabrina, because she had just said the one thing I needed her to say, the thing I had waited through all of this to hear her say out loud, that I had no money, that I had no power, that I was nothing. I let the silence hold for one long beat. Then I reached into the breast pocket of my gray suit, and I drew out my phone, and I set it on the counter beside Foss's records, and I looked at the woman who had priced my life and found it worthless. "You keep saying that," I said softly, "that I have no money, that I have no power. I would like you to remember in a moment that you said it, because you have understood exactly one thing correctly in this entire affair, Sabrina, and it is not that. It is that we are all of us out of time." I pressed play. I had cued it the night before, the cleanest passage of all the hours the recorders had caught. And now Sabrina's own voice rose out of the little phone and filled the shop, unhurried, certain, terrible. He goes in, and to the rest of the world, he's just a sick old man being cared for quietly, until... And then Marcus, flat and strange, finishing it. Until his heart gives out. A few months, maybe less. And nobody investigates. And Sabrina again, soft as a lullaby. And then the estate settles to his conservator, which is us. And it's over. I let it play to the end. I watched their own words land on them. Watched Marcus go the color of ash. Watched Sabrina's mouth open and close on nothing. When the recording stopped, the silence that followed was the loudest thing in that room full of ticking clocks. "That is lawful," I said quietly. "Recorded in my own home and my own shop, which this state permits. That is not a grudge, Sabrina, and it is not a guilty doctor. That is, the two of you in your own voices planning the month of my death for money. There is no litigation in the world that talks its way around that." Marcus sank into the customer's chair as though his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him. But Sabrina was still standing, still swaying on the edge of the cornered thing she had become, and she threw her last card, the only one she had left. "It doesn't matter," she said, hoarse now. "It doesn't matter what you have. We are out of time, and so are you. We owe people, Edmund, real people, and that debt comes due in days, and when it does, they will not care about your tapes or your doctor. That money has to be paid. It has to be paid, and the only thing in this world that pays it is your estate, and your estate belongs to Marcus now. So you can play us that recording all morning. It changes nothing. The debt is still there. It is still coming, and it will take everything one way or another." And there it was. She had brought me herself to the last door and set her hand upon it and opened it for me. "The debt," I said. "Yes, let us finish with the debt. You are right that it is real. You are right that it is coming due in days. You are right that dangerous men are holding it and that they do not care about tapes." I picked up the leather folder from the counter, the second one, the one no one had yet seen inside. "You are wrong about only one thing. You said I have no money. Sabrina, I want you to listen to me very carefully now, because you spent months robbing a man you never once bothered to understand." I opened the folder. "For 40 years, my late wife and I quietly gathered the rarest timepieces in the world, and I held the mechanical patents from my engineering career. And all of it has been managed out of your sight and your reach by this woman sitting beside me, whom you took this morning for a lawyer. Her name is Vivian Reyes. She manages the Hale Trust. And the trust, Marcus," I said, turning to my son, "the trust you never once suspected, because I spent your whole life teaching you not to look, is worth more than every debt you have ever carried, multiplied 100 times over. You sold your father to pay a creditor. You were standing on a fortune the entire time, and you were too small to see it." Marcus stared at me, and I watched the shape of what he had done arrange itself fully in his face at last. "But that is not the part I most want you to hear," I said, and I set the final page on the counter. The certified assignment, Vivian's signature, and the notary's seal upon it. "Last night, while you were celebrating your hearing, I used a fraction of that fortune to buy your debt. Every dollar of it. I paid the men you were so afraid of in full, in cash, and they signed the whole of it over gladly. The debt that has been hunting you, the debt you were willing to kill me to escape, is no longer owed to dangerous strangers. It is owed to me. I am your creditor now, Marcus. I am the clock you have been running from, and it has just struck." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus came out of the chair and crossed the small distance between us and went down, actually down onto his knees on the floor of the shop, where I had taught him nothing and should have taught him everything. And he seized my hand in both of his. "Dad," he wept. "Dad, please. I'm your son. I'm your only son. I was frightened. I wasn't thinking. They were going to kill me. Please, you can't. I'm your blood." I looked down at him for a long time. And I felt, I will tell you honestly, the old pull, the terrible gravity of a child's face turned up to a father. But I felt it the way you feel the memory of warmth from a fire long dead. "You stopped being my blood," I said, and I drew my hand free of his. "The night you weighed my life on a scale and found it lighter than your fear. You did not make a mistake, Marcus. A mistake is a thing you do not mean. You meant every second of it. And now you will answer for every second of it." I looked past him to the front window where 2 more cars had come quietly to the curb behind the transport van, and calm figures were stepping out into the morning light and moving toward my door. They did not drag my son out of the shop. I want to tell you that because I had imagined this morning many times in the days leading to it, and in my imaginings there was always violence, and there was none. The people who came through my door were quiet and unhurried, and they had with them every page Vivian and Foss had gathered, and they read Marcus and Sabrina their rights in low, even voices, while the clocks ticked around them, and my son did not resist and did not weep again. He had gone somewhere behind his own eyes by then, to whatever room a man goes to when he has finally understood the size of what he has lost. Sabrina cursed once and then fell silent, and the two of them were walked out past the transport van they had ordered for me and put instead into the back of a plain car and driven away into the ordinary morning. I did not watch them go. I have been asked why. The truth is that there was nothing left to see. The Sunayad was already gone, had been gone I understood now for a long time before that Saturday, and the man they took away was a stranger who happened to wear his face. In the months that followed, the law did what the law does, slowly and imperfectly. The recording and the records and the assignment of the debt were more than enough. But the thing I am proudest of, the thing that mattered more to me than my son's sentence or my daughter-in-law's, was what Cora's small discovery grew into. That buried story she had found. The old woman with the distant nephew, the sold house, and the quiet death was not the only one. Once the investigators had a thread to pull, the whole garment came apart. The facility, the friendly filing agent, the cluster of names that had orbited more conservatorships than anyone had ever bothered to count. It was not only my family they had preyed upon. It was a machine exactly as I had feared, and because I had waited, because I had not smashed it early to save only myself, it came apart in the daylight. All of it, and the small stories that had gone nowhere for years, finally went somewhere. I have had letters since, from families I never met, thanking a watchmaker they have never seen. I keep them in the drawer beneath my bench. And then there is Julian Foss, and I must tell you what became of him, because his is the part of this story I understand least and treasure most. He did not escape. He had never asked to. He walked into it with his eyes open, knowing what his own records would cost him, and they cost him exactly what he expected. He lost his license. There were proceedings and consequences, and he met each of them without once trying to lessen his own share of the blame. He could have run. He could have burned his second set of records the moment his conscience began to itch, and let the whole thing fall on me alone. Instead, he had driven to my street 4 times in the rain until he found the courage to knock, and that knock had cost him his entire profession and saved my entire life. I went to see him after. I found a man lighter than the one who had stood dripping in my doorway, a man who had lost a great deal and did not seem to mourn it. When I asked him why he had chosen the harder thing, when every practical reason in the world argued for the easy one, he thought about it for a while, and then he said something I have carried with me since. He said that he had spent his whole life measuring himself by what he could keep, his practice, his standing, his comfort, and that the night he decided to knock on my door, he had understood for the first time that a man is measured instead by what he is willing to lose. I have known that truth my whole life about clocks, that the value of a thing is in what it costs to make it true. I had not known until Julian Foss taught me that it is the same with a soul. As for the shop, it is still here. I am still at the bench, though I am slower now, and the good gray suit hangs again in its cedar closet where it belongs. Cora works beside me still, and she is not my apprentice anymore, not really. I have begun the long, quiet business of signing the shop over to her, the honest way, in daylight, with her sitting across from me, understanding every page. My blood son priced my life and tried to take it. This young woman who shares not a drop of my blood spent 3 years loving the work I love and asking how things are made. And it is to her that everything I know will pass. I have thought a great deal this past year about what family actually is, and I have decided it is not the thing we are told it is, but that is the lesson, and I am getting ahead of myself again, and a watchmaker should never skip the final gear. So let me stop here in the shop, in the ordinary daylight among the clocks that Eleanor and I placed and that Cora will one day tend without me. And let me tell you, before I close the case on all of it, the one true thing I learned about time and blood, and what it means to be counted. Here is what I learned, and it took me 69 years and the loss of my only son to learn it. We are taught, all of us, that blood is the thing that binds, that family is the one bond that cannot be broken, that a son is a son, no matter what he becomes, that the tie of blood is stronger than any other tie in the world. I believed this. I believed it so completely that I let it blind me for weeks to a man reaching into my life to end it. I kept looking for the boy I had raised inside the stranger who had come to rob me, because I could not accept that blood alone had failed to make him good. And that, I think, is the most dangerous lie we tell each other. Not that family matters. Family matters more than almost anything. But that blood by itself guarantees loyalty. It does not. It never has. Loyalty is not inherited. It is not carried in the blood like the color of the eyes. Loyalty is a thing that must be built the way a movement is built, part by part, over years, out of small daily choices to be trustworthy when it would be easier not to be. My son carried my blood and none of my loyalty. A doctor who owed me nothing and a young woman who shared not a drop of me carried more of it than he ever did. I had spent my life believing the people I was given were the people I could count on. I know now that the people you can count on are the ones who, when the moment comes and the cost is real, choose you. That choosing is what family actually is. The blood is only an accident. The choosing is the whole of it. I learned too something about being underestimated, and it is a thing I would give to every person who has been made to feel small because they had gray hair or a modest coat or a quiet life. They looked at me and saw a used-up old man, and they were so certain of it that they stopped being careful, and their certainty was the loose gear that brought their whole machine down. Do not despise the ones who underestimate you. They are handing you the one advantage that matters. The world is full of people who mistake gentleness for weakness and quiet for emptiness, and they will go on making that mistake right up until the moment it costs them everything. A man's worth is not in how loudly he takes up space. It is in what he is still capable of quietly when everyone has decided he is capable of nothing. And I learned the hardest thing of all, which is that you cannot save a person who has decided to destroy you. I wanted to save Marcus. Somewhere beneath all my cold precision, I think I went on wanting it until the very end. But there comes a point where holding on to someone who is pulling you under is not love. It is only drowning together. And the bravest and most necessary thing a person can do is to let go and let them face the consequences of their own hands, and choose to keep his own life instead. That is not bitterness. I am not a bitter man. It is simply the refusal to be destroyed by someone else's choices. Sometimes protecting your own peace means walking away from the very people you were told you must never walk away from. And there is no shame in it, and it does not make you hard. It only means you have finally understood your own worth. I am 70 now. The shop is quiet in the mornings before Cora comes, and I sit at the bench with my coffee, and I listen to the clocks, and I think about Eleanor. And I am not lonely in the way you might expect. A man who has learned who truly chose him is never entirely alone. The 40 clocks keep their patient count. Time moves through them steady and exact, indifferent to what any of us deserve. And there is a great comfort in that, I have found. Time does not take sides. It only keeps going. And the only question any of us ever really answers in the end is what we chose to do with the seconds we were given. I chose in mine not to disappear quietly into the dark that two frightened people had arranged for me. I chose to be counted. And if there is one thing I would ask you to carry away from an old watchmaker's story, it is that you are worth counting too. However small the world has tried to make you feel, and that it is never, ever too late to prove it. If this story moved you, if any part of it found a place in your own life, I hope you will take a moment to let me know. Tell me in the comments below whether you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, and what you did when the moment came to prove them wrong. I read every one of them, truly. And if you would like to stay for more stories like this one, stories of ordinary people who were counted out and refused to stay counted out, then please take a moment to subscribe, and I will see you again in the next one. Until then, be well, and remember to wind your clocks. The time you keep is the only time you truly own.